Welcome to the H series of webinars. This webinar series is aimed at new and aspiring sheep producers to give them a step up into the Queensland sheep industry. This webinar is part 1 of the series and covers sheep health. This webinar was delivered by veterinarian and sheep producer Dr. Nolo Dempsey on the 16th of April 2020. This is clip 2 of 5 and covers how to keep worms at bay in your flock.
What can you do to keep your sheep in good health? The first thing is to know the enemy. As I said, Barber's Pole is the most important worm, and there's 2 great publications that are available for every district in Queensland. The first is the Worm Boss Regional Worm Control Plans, which give you a great oversight into worm control in your particular area, and the Drench Decision Guides. At the Worm Boss site, there's a handy map to tell you which worm control plan and Drench Decision Guide you should be looking at, and each of these are targeted at specific areas. The Drench Decision Guides consist of only 2 pages. They have a series of questions followed by drenching recommendations and handy info about the worms. Quarantine and quarantine drenching is extremely important, and it is recommended that for quarantine drenching you use 4 actors, including one of either Startec or Zolvix. You're keeping the sheep in a quarantine paddock for 4 to 5 days, and the reason you're doing this is you do not want to buy someone else's problems. If you're establishing a sheep enterprise, but you're going to buy them in with the sheep you purchase, and the idea of the quarantine and quarantine drenching is to ensure they have the least possible chance of contaminating your pastures. Regular worm egg counting and culture is extremely important, and in my own notes I've underlined culture. The reason for this is you want to know which species you have. If, for example, adult wethers and you had 600 eggs per gram and they were all scaleworms, you'd have to do a lot of convincing to get me out and drench those sheep. One of the things that's very important to do is keep the records of worm egg counting, and it'll help you to build up a picture across your property and individual paddocks, which are wormy paddocks, which are not. I've personally got one paddock just close to the shearing shed that is extremely wormy, and some years ago I was losing sheep from Barber's Pole in that paddock, and they did not at that stage have a high worm egg count. I was losing them to larval infestation. It's important to use effective drenches on your property, and you must know which drenches are working. You can do this with either a formal drench test, and details of that are in the Worm Boss Regional Worm Control Plan, or you can do a worm egg count 10 to 14 days after drenching. This is called a drench check day 10. Those dates are very specific. It is 10 to 14 days. Otherwise, you can get contamination by new worms coming in. One of the important things that you can do, particularly in merinos, is selection of sires for worm resistance. This is called the Worm Egg Count Australian Sheep Breeding Value. I purchased rams last year that had a worm egg count ASBV of -70, which meant that they were carrying 70% less worms than others in the population. The question has been raised, are southern results for rams useful, particularly because they have different species that are important in the southern areas? And the answer is that southern results are useful. Animals that are highly resistant in the south are still highly resistant to the worms we get locally. And paddock management is very important, and there are great details again in the regional worm control plans. It's important that you understand the difference between drench resistance, worm resistance, and resilience. These terms are bandied around, and the definitions are given there. Drench resistance is an attribute of the worm, and it is its ability to survive a drench. Drench resistance will determine which drenches are no longer working effectively on your property. Worm resistance, on the other hand, is an attribute of the sheep, and it is sheep that prevent some or all of the worms from establishing in the gut and thus have a lower worm egg count. Resilience, on the other hand, is sheep which can grow and reproduce with less ill effects from worms, even at the same worm egg count. When Dorpers first come into the country, everyone said that they were more resistant than Merinos. Well, as it turned out, they're actually much more resilient, but apparently from the results that I've seen, less resistant. Which drench groups are available? In the list here, I've included a mixture of brand names and group names because I thought they would be the most familiar to most people. And just running through them quickly, the old BZ or white drenches, levamisole, the macrocyclic lactones, the sidectins, the ivermectins, the abamectins, etc. Zolvix is a brand name, and the reason I haven't given you the group name is that they are, Zolvix is actually an amino acetonitrile derivative group. So I thought Zolvix might actually mean a little bit more to you. The next group is the OPs, the Closantel Startec, which is sold with a ml. Startec is, its chemical is Dequantel, and it's a member of the spiroindole group. There are a range of combinations on the market. They're very useful. Their use is recommended, but do not mix your own drenches unless the label says that you can. You are likely to get less than effective results, and with some of the products you may in fact get deaths. Indicative cost for drenches from about 10 cents a head through to about $1.04 for a 50 kilogram sheep. It's important that you know the weight of your animals so that you can drench accordingly. A few words of warning: do not buy on cost. Look for effectiveness of your property. If you don't know what might be effective, ask around, but remember that effectiveness is an attribute of the worms on your property. It may be completely different to which drenches will work on your neighbours. Another word of warning: do not rotate between different brand names. Rotate between active groups. A lot of the groups have many different brand names. Look for which is the active working in that brand. As a final comment, use combinations and short-acting drenches where possible. This will delay resistance, and it's likely to be much more effective than single active drenches. As well, some of the old drenches, such as the BZs and maybe levamisoles, for which there is widespread resistance, are still effective in a combination.
Thank you for watching this short clip. For more information, please visit www.leadingsheep.com.au.